Welcome, people of planet Earth and all planets beyond. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Josh, and today we're going to talk about how to identify your vintage Wranglers. Let's get into it. So Wrangler is considered part of the Big Three, or the Trinity of American denim, along with Levi's and Lee. Wrangler is the youngest of those three. Those other two trace their lineage all the way back to like 1800s, whereas Wrangler, at least as we know it today, started in 1947. They were owned by a company called Blue Bell, which does trace their lineage a little bit older than that, into the early 1900s. But as far as the Wrangler we know today, that started in 1947. So a good little outer bound of your Wranglers is 1947. Now, out of these three big brands, Wrangler probably has the least community knowledge about its history. There's not a lot of good Wrangler information out there. A lot more attention has been given to Lee, and certainly a lot more to Levi's. Levi's, you can basically find every bit of information you could possibly want about dating a particular pair of Levi's. In fact, if you want to go to our playlist, we have a bunch of videos about that topic. But Wrangler has very little, so I sought out to get a little bit more clarity about the brand, to help people understand where what era their Wranglers come from. So I've broken this down into about three periods. We're going to have a period from 1947 all the way to the mid 60s, and from the mid 60s to the late 80s, and the late 80s to present day. And we're going to give you a few methods to try to determine the approximate ages of your Wranglers within each one of those time periods. Now, with all dating methods, you do need to remember that they are approximate, they are general, their exceptions do exist. And when we say something happened around a certain time period, that was probably a progressive transition. A lot of times, or very few times in textile production, did something happen completely overnight and changed across all of the manufacturing. That just doesn't tend to happen that way in manufacturing. So remember, all transitions generally are progressive, and exceptions do exist. Now, that being said, I do have an experimental sort of secret hypothesis I do want to let you know about at the end of the video. If you want to wait and check that out at the end of the video, it'll be pretty interesting, I think. So let's go ahead and let's dive right into our Wrangler denim jeans, starting at the very earliest possible Wrangler denim jean. And this one we can actually nail down to a very particular year, and that's because it is the Proto Type, so to speak, a name given to it by its community. It was a very early version of Wrangler jeans that used an arcuate too similar to the Levi's arcuate on its back pocket. And this required Wrangler, due to trademark infringement, to change it the next year in 1948. So if you have a pair of Wranglers with the arcuate that looks way more like Levi's, you're looking at a pair from 1947 most likely. And this is a pretty rare and valuable piece. After 1948, we got the WW back pockets that we know today. This stood for Western Wear, so Wrangler Western Wear, or just now Wrangler. It's a pretty infamous pocket. I think it's one of the coolest looking pocket designs. I mean, the arcuate on Levi's is classic. Lee's is sort of bleh, but the Wrangler one is definitely cool, sharp, and edgy. So beyond the prototype, this first period, we're going to look at a couple major changes specifically to the branding, interior labels, and exterior labels. And the first one we're going to look at is the Blue Bell. This is by far the most significant and important element that you're going to use to date your Wrangler jeans. The oldest Wrangler jeans are going to have a Blue Bell stamped above the Wrangler logo. That's because Wrangler was a offshoot or a subsidiary of Blue Bell. So from the very earliest 1947 all the way till the mid 60s, Blue Bell was part of the Wrangler logo and attached to every label, interior and exterior, on jackets and on jeans. So if you have a Blue Bell label above the Wrangler, you're looking at a pair of jeans that are older than the mid 60s. Another change that was made, and this one in the early 60s, was a trademark logo was added. So if your Wrangler garment has a label that has the Blue Bell and without a trademark stamp on the label, it is older than the early 1960s. You can then find, because of the combination of these two methods, some jeans from the early and mid 60s that are Blue Bell stamped and trademark stamped. Those are good indications that you're looking at an early to mid 60s pair of Wranglers. A lot can be learned from those labels. In fact, I've included a link to a really good table of a bunch of labels from Wrangler denim jackets that can help pinpoint the age of your Wrangler denim jacket down to the decade. And it is in the link in the description below. It can be really helpful. Beyond that, in the 60s, 50s, and 40s, the most common zipper used was the Conmar zipper or the gripper zipper. Talon was sometimes used in the mid 60s and was sometimes used and probably often used on the denim jackets. So looking for those zippers will really help you determine what side of these periods your denim jeans or jackets are on. Now moving into the mid 60s to the 1980s, there are a lot of transitions and a lot of things happening in this time period that were fairly well documented, that were not lost to history, so we can use some of those things to really help us. And one of the most significant things was a change in American textile manufacturing rules. And in 1971, the government started requiring textile manufacturers to include wash and care instructions with their garments. So that was a rule applied across the board, and Wrangler was required just like anybody else. So in approximately 1971-72, this began, and you started seeing care instructions added to Wrangler jeans. And so if your Wrangler garment does not have any care instructions, you can be pretty confident that it is older than 1971-72 range. Now, shortly after this change, Wrangler made another change to their label. Now that they had to add all this information, they needed a little bit more real estate. And previous generations of labels were perpendicular to the zipper. You can see an example of that here. And they decided to make the label now parallel to the zipper and a more rectangle shape, as you can see here. You can find perpendicular tags that do have wash instructions. That's a good indicator of an early 70s pair of jeans. And you can find them without. So if you find a perpendicular tag without the Blue Bell symbol and without care instructions, you're looking at the late 60s into the very early 70s. Transitions also did take place on the denim jackets, although generally speaking, an extra tag was added to show the wash instructions rather than include it on the main back label, as the case was with the denim jeans. So the parallel version of the label is still in use today. So it is a pretty good indicator that you've got a garment that is younger than the mid 70s. So in this middle segment, we also get a lot of advertising that can help us determine the general age of our garments if some other elements are not available. First is a phrase that was used in the late 60s called "look for the W," obviously referring to the W on the jean pocket. This seems to have been used in the late 60s and it was replaced around 1970 with a different phrase called "remember the W is silent," of course with a silent W at the beginning of remember. This phrase was trademarked in 1970 and appears to be used almost immediately after that, and it ran until about 1976. So if your garment has dead stock tags on it and it says something like "remember the W is silent," you're looking at a very early 70s to mid 70s garment. Then in 1976, the "no fault denim" phrase was coined and trademarked and used from like 1976 all the way until about 1986. So a good 10-year period for the no-fault denim era. Anything that has no-fault denim is going to fall in that range. Also, another one called Rapid Transit with that silent W appears to have started around that mid-70s period and into the early 80s. It was similar to the orange tab line in Levi's and the moving on line, sort of a casual, fashion-forward, maybe a little bit more economical version of Wrangler, using a lot of other materials other than just straight up denim. And this one again ended around the early 80s. Another thing that Wrangler loved to use at this time period was slapping on trade symbols. These were symbols that were used to help consumers understand a little bit more about the product and have a little bit more confidence. And one of the earliest ones that Wrangler used was the seal of cotton, which was developed by cotton growers in America to symbolize and to demonstrate garments that were made 100% of American cotton. And this seal was formed in the early 70s, around 1973, and appears to have been used on Wrangler garments as early as 1974. So if your garment has like hang tags from being brand new, it may have this seal of cotton on there, and that's a good indicator that your garment is younger than 1974. Another trade symbol that you can use to help determine the age of your garment is the crafted with pride in America, which was a symbol or a seal that was created by American textile producers in 1984, used to symbolize garments that were made of 100% American-made materials and manufacturing. This was used by Wrangler because they absolutely never have found a trade symbol that they didn't want to use. They slapped this one on there approximately around the same time, 1985 or so. So if you find a garment with crafted with pride on it, you've got a garment that is younger than 1984, 85. In fact, you can actually use this to help you determine the age of jackets really well, because they actually use the crafted with pride stamp straight onto some of their denim jackets from this period, and can be a real good indicator of what side of the 80s your Wrangler denim jacket is from. Zippers from this era include the Talon 42 zipper. In the 70s, it was much more common to see the Talon in the late 60s and into the 70s. And then by the 80s, Scoville zippers became pretty predominant among Wrangler jeans. So those two zippers are the most common that you will find, and are good indicators of this second middle period of Wrangler history. Now in 1987, this is our transition to our final period of Wrangler history, and that's because the VF Corp bought Blue Bell and all its subsidiaries, including Wrangler, Rustler, Maverick, Chic, and a few others, and they took over operation of the company. So if you see VF Corp attached to any part of your garment, you're clearly looking at a garment younger than 1987. Now in this period of the 90s, we are continuing to use that parallel tag, though more information has begun to be added to it. In fact, in the mid-90s, it appears somewhere between like 93 and 95. We're not entirely sure, but there was a transition in the format of this tag. It remained parallel, but they took some of those random numbers that are attached to the label, and they justified them all the way to the right end of the tag and turned them perpendicular to the zipper. And that's where they stayed, it appears, for the last half of the 90s. So if you have a garment that has a tag with that information perpendicular to the zipper and that right side of the label, you're looking at a garment that most likely was produced after the mid-90s. Also in this last period is the end of the majority of American production and the production of garments in Mexico. In 2001, Wrangler began producing garments in Mexico. So if your garment was produced in Mexico, it is produced after 2001. Most likely it isn't vintage. There may be a couple of models that technically qualify for the 20-year age of vintage, but most of them would not be. This doesn't necessarily mean that American production was completely ceased. In fact, Wrangler still does some American production, but for the most part, American production did end. And if your garment was made in USA, you have a pretty good chance that those garments are at least vintage into the early 2000s. A couple lines from this final period of note are the Wrangler Hero line, which was started as a sort of a VF project, it looks like, in the late 80s. A lot of acid wash jeans have the Wrangler Hero branding, and the George Strait line, which was released in 2003. Wrangler also had lines like Silver Lake, which was a late 80s and early 90s line. It didn't seem to last last too much beyond that. All right, so I hope you found some of that information helpful. Hopefully that can help you get a good idea of at least roughly and approximately how old your Wrangler garments are. And hopefully we'll be getting out more information to be a little bit even more specific as we do more research and put some more stuff together. So thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you guys on the next one. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe. Peace. All right, they gone? Okay, so if you made it here, you're really interested. You're a total denim nerd. Welcome. Anyway, so the thing about it is I mentioned that with these label changes, the company started adding other information that helped them with their production, managing their products across many years, etc. Well, all the other brands did this as well. In fact, you can look at the back of a Levi's care tag and learn lots about it. In fact, if you click the eye above, that'll tell you everything you need to know. But you can learn where it was produced, what month and year it was produced, what style it is, all that jazz. Well, Wrangler also did that, at least put some information there. But as far as I can tell, nobody has ever cracked it. Nobody's made a suggestion about it. Can find no indication that anybody even cares about it. And that's totally fine because it's not one of the most iconic garments, specifically from that era. It certainly isn't as desirable as maybe Levi's is from those eras. But I thought, I'm a nerd, I need to figure this one out. So what I started to notice is there's an 8-digit string of numbers that start appearing in the late 70s. And they run through the 80s and into the 90s, and it's the same sort of format. It starts out with a single digit followed by 3 or 4 letters, and then a combination of letters and numbers depending. And I started noticing some patterns here. I could use other methods to isolate down to certain approximate ages of the garment, and then I could look at the number at the beginning of that string of numbers, and it always seemed to sort of correspond to the time period I'd already sort of established. Like, take for instance this tag. It says wash with all temperature cheer. Cheer was a detergent at the time, pretty popular in the 80s, and I believe this tag to be from around the 80s. And what I noticed is that I never can find a label that includes cheer that was not beginning with a 1, 2, or 3. And other indications would suggest that these were all from the earlier half of the 80s. I can't ever find a 4, and I can't ever find a 5 with the cheer brand included. So this made me think maybe this first digit is the last digit of the year that it was produced. So all of these labels that include the brand cheer were from either 81, 82, or 83. And since I couldn't find 84 or 85, I could use other methods to determine that as well, like the crafted with pride symbol. And what I actually did is I found the crafted with pride symbol on a garment, and I noticed that it had a 5 at the beginning. It couldn't have, or at least with that label design, it couldn't have a 3 or a 4 or a 2 or a 1 because those would be before it was produced. So I have this theory that first digit is the last digit of the year production of the garment. Now, of course, you will need to get yourself into the right decade to determine whether or not that is a 92 or a 90 or an 82, whatever, but that is a little bit easier to do. So, I don't know if this is true. I don't want to speak too authoritatively on it. It's a suspicion. It's a theory. You can help me out by letting me know if it seems to work for your garments in the comments below, or my email is also in the description if you want to email me what you find and what you can come up with, and let's see and test this hypothesis. Let's see if we can crack the Wrangler code. That's one of my big aspirations in life right now, so I'm a total nerd. Anyway, thank you guys again for watching and sticking around a little extra for the secret sauce, the hidden theory, and hopefully we'll crack this pretty soon and we'll do a video on it in the future. Alright, thanks guys. Bye.